So shall we call a meeting to order, the April 2nd meeting of the Waterfront Committee? And call roll.
Committee Member Davis. Committee Member Papalea.
Here.
Committee Member Nason.
Here.
And Chair Johns.
Here. Will someone make a motion for approval of the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes as stated in for the February 5th meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And does any member of the public want to speak on an issue that is not on our agenda? I guess not. So we will move on to the agenda item 5-1, which is our work session on the preparation of the general plan update and waterfront-related goals and policies. And it looks like Mr. Miller will lead our efforts.
Thank you. I don't know if Jeff was going to say anything before I started.
I was just going to introduce Barry. He is a consultant that's been retained by the city for about the last year and a half now to work with us on updating our 23-year-old general plan. And sometime last year, I believe Barry made an initial presentation to the committee as he's making the rounds to various committees and commissions. And we wanted to have him come back to you to give you an opportunity to hear what's going on with the general plan and get some input from you. I'll let Barry take it from here. Perhaps you can at some point just kind of update them on the process overall and when they can expect that
Sure.
drafts will be available and so forth.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, committee. I was here last April with a presentation to the committee, so I didn't do a PowerPoint to walk you through the same things I would have walked you through back then. Essentially, in a nutshell, this is the update of the general plan, which is required of every city and county in California. Albany's current general plan, which is this document that hopefully many of you have seen over the years, was adopted in 1992. It was primarily written between 1989 and 1991, so it is over 20 years old at this point. The city's updating the plan both to move the horizon year forward out to 2035, so we're looking at the next 20 years, whereas this plan looked at 20 years that is now over. We're also addressing new legal requirements for general plans. We're looking at current issues that really weren't on the table 20 years ago or that weren't discussed in the same way. We're looking at potentially reorganizing parts of the plan to make it more user-friendly and more relevant, and we're incorporating current data about the city. As you can imagine, with a plan that's 20 years old, it references the 1990 census. It talks about the yet-to-be-completed improvements at the 580-80 interchange and so forth. So it's clearly dated and not really relevant for the purposes of thinking about the future of Albany. Interestingly, on the subject of the waterfront, the plan is relatively quiet. It does talk a little bit about the shoreline improvements, but it doesn't really dive into great detail about land use choices and future alternatives. It essentially talks about the open space and park and recreation values of the waterfront and the importance of preserving those into the future. So where we are right now is there's been a huge focus in particularly the last 6 months, on the housing element. And this is a mandatory chapter of the general plan that looks at affordable housing and special needs housing in the city. And it's required of every city and county. In the case of the housing element, the focus is on a planning period that goes from 2007 to 2014. So most of that period is actually behind us, but the housing element still looks ahead into the future, and this is a document that had to be submitted for state certification. The City Council did adopt the housing element in March, so that portion of the general plan update is completed. We will have to do another update of that element before this process is over, but having an adopted housing element for the city is a huge achievement and a major milestone in this process. So that is done, that is adopted. What we've also done during this time period is a policy audit, and this is a task in which we go through all of the planning documents that are related to all long-range planning topics and call out those that have some implication for the future of the city. So we started with the original general plan document and then moved through the Parks and Recreation Plan, the East Shore Parks Plan, the Climate Action Plan, the Creekside Master Plan, the Public Arts Plan, and so forth, basically going through all of the plans and pulling out those policies that may have a place in the updated general plan. With respect to the waterfront, I'm just going to go through the plans that we have reviewed, the existing general plan, and I should say we also included late the list of policy statements and narrative statements that are in the existing general plan that deal with the waterfront. I think the committee members received that yesterday in an afternoon email. The East Shore State Park Plan, which covers the waterfront area, the City of Albany recommendations for the Albany portion of the East Shore State Park Plan, which is from 1995, the Climate Action Plan, Voices to Vision, various documents that were produced through that process. And we also looked at plans for adjacent cities, for Berkeley, for El Cerrito, for Richmond, particularly as they relate to the waterfront, to try to put together the set of policies. What is still undecided is if there will be a separate element of the general plan that just talks about the waterfront issues, or whether waterfront topics will be addressed throughout the planning document. In the event that the waterfront is not its own freestanding chapter of the general plan, it'll be covered pretty much in every one of the other elements, because there are aspects of land use, transportation, conservation, open space, and safety that all touch the waterfront. Probably the only topic that's not where the waterfront isn't really involved is housing. On transportation, we'd be looking at access and circulation issues, especially pedestrian and bicycle access. Conservation issues, we would be looking at wetlands preservation, special status species, and vegetation. On open space, we would be looking at park and recreation improvements, bringing in proposed improvements and laying out the policies for improving park and shoreline access. And on safety, we would most likely be focusing on issues like climate and adaptation to rising sea levels, the implications of rising sea levels on future activities on the shoreline. So we're not at the point yet where we have those policies drafted, but that will be coming probably in the next 4 to 6 months. The primary body for receiving the information on the general plan is the Planning and Zoning Commission. And at this point, we have had 10 study sessions with the Planning and Zoning Commission. 6 of those 10 study sessions were on the housing element. So that kind of gives you a sense of where the focus has been. We are now shifting to the other topic areas. We just last week had a study session on land use policy issues. And it was an interesting dialogue with the commission about the future, particularly of the San Pablo Avenue corridor, Solano Avenue, and other parts of the city. I wanted to also mention that there's an EIR associated with the general plan, and we have had a scoping session. Scoping session is where there's an opportunity for the public to weigh in on issues that they think should be addressed in the EIR. It's the very first task when you start an environmental impact report, is to kind of hold an open forum for just hearing about the kinds of issues that should be covered in an environmental impact report that really looks so broadly at the future development patterns and transportation patterns in the city over the next 20 years. So the EIR is looking at the impacts of adding roughly 650 to 700 housing units in Albany over the next 20-year period. And that is not through changing any zoning or changing designations on our map. That is development that already could occur under our existing land use regulations based on projections, based on past trends. 175 of those 650 or so units is already approved in the senior housing project on San Pablo Avenue, so that's about a quarter of that total. Most of that development is on the San Pablo corridor in mixed-use projects. Again, just to reiterate, the handout that was provided is an excerpt of everything in the existing general plan. It's 20 years old, so it's dated. Clearly, as you read it, you think, well, that's not really relevant anymore, or that's been done. So what we've tried to do is give you 5 questions on the front page, and I hope everyone has this list of 5 questions. I just want to run through these quickly and then turn it back to the committee for any discussion, questions, or feedback. I think we're particularly interested in your feedback, and also I wanted to encourage you to participate in this process after this meeting by engaging with the Planning and Zoning Commission in their deliberations as they move forward on these issues. And also the City Council, obviously, ultimately will approve the general plan. So the 5 questions that are laid out are: first, what are the key waterfront issues that should be covered in the general plan, and how can they be covered in a manner that does not trigger a Measure C vote? And the reason that that's critical is that part of the whole scope of the general plan is really to maintain existing policies on the waterfront and to update the plan to reflect current policies, but not to change direction, not to introduce a radically different land use scenario. So essentially, if we say anything about the waterfront in the general plan, it would need to be of a subject matter and content require a ballot to the general in the next 20 years to change that. But this particular process is really more of an update to move the planning horizon forward rather than to rethink the whole future of the area. Second, in reviewing the 1992 general plan language, are there key points that should be carried forward into the new general plan? Are there points that are no longer relevant? And are there missing topics that should be added? And the 2 examples that I use here are sea level rise and climate adaptation. Third, how can the general plan best incorporate the 2002 East Shore State Park Plan and the June 1995 city proposal for the Albany portion of the park? Fourth, are there other issues or topics related to the waterfront that you think should be covered by the general plan? And again, keeping in mind that the general plan is a long-range planning document, it's not meant to govern operations like vegetation clearance and trail width and things like that. It's really more about the vision for the future of the area. And then fifth, are there specific environmental issues relating to the waterfront that should be covered in the general plan EIR? The scoping period for the EIR is still open. I think it closes on April 14th, so there's still an opportunity to provide feedback to the EIR consultant, that's LSA Associates, as to specific environmental issues that the general plan EIR should cover. So they are open for ideas on that. So with that, I will close and see if there are any questions, comments, or feedback. Thanks.
Questions?
Well, I'll have quite a few questions, but the first one that I'd like you to discuss more is Measure C. Because I realize now that we're having a general plan process in which we aren't planning because on certain things, because in some sense we're kind of frozen in time 20 years ago.
I would say we are doing a plan for the city that recognizes that the set of assumptions, we have a certain set of assumptions for the waterfront that's not changing. But in the remainder of the city, there are policies, land use issues, transportation issues, environmental issues that are all on the table that are all being addressed. So it's still a forward-looking, forward-thinking document. It's still a chance to think about the future of the city, with the caveat that there will be future planning activities on the waterfront that are not part of this process. I don't think we would get through the general plan update if we were trying to resolve all of those issues.
No, I'm just saying that I mean, we're having a planning process, a general plan process.
Right.
And what I've come to realize is that Measure C says we really can't, and what you just told us was, we can't discuss anything that could trigger Measure C. So it's kind of a catch-22. Like, this is a general plan update, but we really aren't updating. We can't really update anything on the waterfront planning because then we'd have to have a Measure C vote. But we could do that. It just would require a Measure C vote for that portion of the general plan.
I would see there's two ways to look at that. We are updating the plan with respect to the waterfront to reflect all of the other plans that have been done in the last 20 years and all of the progress that's been made in terms of improving the East Shore State Park and developing more detailed plans for that area. So all of that will be incorporated. None of that is in the general plan right now. But changing the direction would be a separate process that would require a different set of rules, I would say. And yes, that would require a vote.
But isn't that what you're kind of doing with the rest of the general plan? I mean, you have the freedom to say, okay, we think that sustainability is a vital element that we need to do when it comes to housing. So you say, we're going to do that, but we can't really do something like that. Let's just say, for instance, at the waterfront, just thought of it, sustainability. Someone said we wanted to use the area out there for a wind farm. But we really can't even plan for that option because as part of the general plan, because it's kind of off limits, right?
That's right.
So
I mean,
all new ideas are off the table when it comes to the waterfront. Considering the fact that it's, I mean, except for, so what validates, you've incorporated Voices to Vision into the planning process. And did that change? There was no vote on that.
I would say we have acknowledged Voices to Vision in the planning process. We haven't incorporated it necessarily. I mean, I think the end result of that was a set of aspirations for the area, but an acknowledgement that there was more planning work that had to be done. And we're essentially saying that that is still the case. There's more planning work that will need to be done in that area in the future. The general plan is dynamic. It's not the end. It's not as though once this is adopted, everything freezes for 20 years. I think that's part of, you know, we have a little bit of a constraint with the way things are, but that's not that unusual in doing a long-range plan. There are certain things that you can't tackle in this process.
So was there an element that would have been something that you would have liked to have explored or considered regarding the waterfront, but that you felt you were unable to because it would have triggered a Measure C vote?
Not me personally. I think there probably are people in the city who might feel that way. But from my perspective, this will still be a forward-thinking plan that moves Albany 20 years ahead and recognizes that there's more work to be done in one particular part of the city.
If I could just add to the discussion, I think citywide, across a number of issues, you're not going to see dramatic changes. The San Pablo commercial district's almost certainly going to retain the same footprint, the same for Solano Avenue. So it's we're modernizing it, but we're not intentionally, then based on direction of City Council, we're not reinventing Albany with this planning process. So I don't, Measure C does have a procedural constraint, but I think keeping the basic themes that are in that in the existing general plan and some of the other planning documents is somewhat similar to how we're treating other subject areas.
So I had a question. During your initial presentation, you talked about whether the waterfront would be a separate component of the general plan moving forward. How will that be decided?
Ultimately, we're going to ask the council to weigh in on that. I think, and we're not, it's still on, that's also still on the table for discussion. I think regardless of whether it's a separate element, the content is still going to be in the plan. It's just a question of whether it's pulled out of each of those chapters where it will appear and made its own chapter. So it's more of an organizational question than a content question. Right now, as I mentioned before, it's going to show up in it'll be in transportation, it'll be in land use, it'll be in open space. Alternatively, it could be its own chapter. The advantage of that is that if anyone wants to know about the waterfront, they can go straight to that chapter. There's been a lot of energy, a lot of policy documents put together in the last 10 years on that area, so there's some logic to having it. It is an expression of how important the waterfront is to the city if it's its own chapter. But there's a downside as well, which is that maybe it doesn't appear in all those other sections where it should. If it's not in transportation, if it's not in open space. So we're still weighing the possibilities. I think there's pros and cons in either direction.
And as a policy expert, do you have an opinion as to which approach is best?
Well, I'm the one who initially proposed that it be a separate element, so I would say yes. My opinion is that it is worth treating as its own chapter of the plan, but it's certainly open to discussion.
And the reason that I asked the question, following what I think is Francesco's line of thought, without a specific venue or a dedicated venue to discuss waterfront issues, it strikes me as even more important that as a policy concern, there's an emphasis and a specificity and a highlighting, a reiteration by the city that these policies, this group of policies, maintain a certain importance.
Mm-hmm.
Those two items seem related to me.
Mm-hmm.
May I?
Please.
I agree with what Brian said, that if I understood it correctly, that a separate element seems to make a good deal of sense under the circumstances. And I think that you answered one question that I was going to ask, which was about this first discussion point, whether whether the plan can reference and summarize and refer to Voices to Vision without triggering a Measure C vote. And it seems like that might be the way to go about this. What occurs to me with this is that once a general plan is completed, when it's done, it's both a guide for policymakers and concerned citizens to get an idea of the direction in which the city is going. And in that regard, the waterfront element of the general plan could be an important part of the city's future outreach to potential developers of the private land, that this is going to be a document of great interest to any such potential developer. And I think that it's very helpful to reiterate that a consensus was reached, that it's reflected here, that this is the policy going forward. It would be, I think, much more effective for that purpose if it is in its own element than if it is scattered around the code. So that seems another reason to make it something separate.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to what I was saying a bit, because Rochelle says, that a future developer could be referring to this. We recently had a rather extensive task force to deal with a potential completely new idea at Golden Gate Fields lands for the second campus for the Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And basically, everything was on the table. And it was kind of a planning process, am I correct, in which there were no rules in the sense of there were certain constrictions, but there were many ideas that were put forth of kind of commercial development that could be there, incorporating past plans and voices to vision. But that was the first real planning process and it wasn't, we weren't worried about Measure C, because the assumption was that whatever they did would have to go through a Measure C vote. But that was pretty dynamic process. And that's what I was saying, that was a planning process, that was, ideas were put forth, and now we have a planning process in which very few, no new ideas are put forth.
I would say, yeah.
And then we're saying, but no, so we want future people to look at this as part of our plan, and yet we have to, the caveat should be that we've revised this 20 years later, but we revised it under the constriction that we really couldn't come up with any new ideas without having to have a Measure C vote. So we've decided not to have a Measure C vote on this, and we're going to just stay within the box. So I think that should kind of be stated rather clearly, because you kind of rather stated it clearly to us. Said, please, what are the waterfront issues that should be covered on, but not in a way in which we can trigger Measure C. It's not a very open discussion or planning idea for the next 25 years.
So I think what the general plan can do is, again, number one, on the subject of recreation and open space, it can go much further than the previous plan by laying out clearly what the expectations are for park improvements, trail improvements, shoreline improvements, access improvements, and all of the things that are where there currently is agreement and policy, mostly. And then leave open the fact that there's going to be a future planning process that determines the future of Golden Gate Fields. Maybe it's a process like what happened when the lab was proposed. Maybe it's a longer-term process that goes on for several years. We don't know at this point what that's going to be. And so I think that when this element is written, it has to be done with the acknowledgement and statement, as you said, that there is this opportunity, this unknown, that will be a future planning process, a future planning study. And I think that's okay. I think that you can still have a legitimate, valid, visionary general plan by leaving some aspect of the future undecided.
Right, just so long as it's under, it's like in a very important, more than just a footnote. It's like,
right.
Let people, 10 years from now when they open it up and or 15 years from now, then they say, well, you're still, any new idea that could come up in the next two decades that might be in conflict with the general plan really visionary shouldn't be constricted by the plan, because we knew we couldn't do anything about it. New visions are not allowed.
Well, they're allowed with a vote.
Right, but during the planning, the new visions weren't decided not to have new visions when we did this plan in 2014 because it would trigger that. So when you open up and you say, oh, here's the plan, that should, to me, that would be like, it should be in the preamble of the waterfront plan.
Right. And in some ways, the existing general plan does exactly that. I mean, it says, we're assuming that the Golden Gate Fields will be in place. It says in here till 2002. It doesn't say what's going to happen after 2002. But in some respects, we are doing something similar by saying the assumption is that there will be a future planning process to look at that issue. As you say, we're not going to decide the vision or the plan for every part of the city through this process. I think we can say that in the preamble or in the introduction. I agree.
Any other questions?
I have a couple of comments, if you're taking comments as well
Please,
as questions, brief ones. One is there seems to be some uncertainty about ownership and control of different portions of the public lands following the contemplated transfer of authority to the East Bay Regional Park District. There seem to be, a lot of folks are under the impression that Albany, in retaining an easement over certain lands, indicated a desire to retain control over those lands. And as I read the documents from when they were created, that's not the case. Albany seems to have retained an easement to serve the marina that was not built, but it did not contemplate retaining control of the lands that the easement would cover. So I think that simply looking at that issue and clarifying it could be helpful for waterfront planning. Another issue that I think has not been dealt with adequately in our planning processes yet is parking for the public lands. Certainly that will be tied in with private development. The two will have to somehow work together to assure that people have the ability to park as needed to have access to the public lands. But it's a big issue to look at how we want people to get down to the park and how we control capacity and those kinds of issues. I think that it probably is not something to be done in this general plan, but it might be worth a reference that eventually parking issues are going to have to, specifically for the public lands, are going to have to be considered.
I have one more comment.
Mm-hmm.
I've been kind of watching how the waterfront's been used in the last 8 years rather closely, and looked and been part of almost every planning process that's gone on during that time. One thing that I have felt would be important, and it relates to how the recreational use is approached. And my recommendation is that as we look at the waterfront as it exists now, the north side of the peninsula that goes out into the bay is ideally suited to remain natural with as little human interaction with it. I bicycled out there today, and I stopped right at the beginning when the mud flats and it was low tide, and I could see the bay shore being revealed in all of its intricacies and the path of the creek going under. And you see nothing, and when you look north, you see very little human artifice. But on the south side, that's where all the people and activities, that's where you see the city, you see the bridge, you see, that's where all of the human activities that are going to be redone and in the East Bay Regional Park District Beach Project.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally would like to see that kind of north-south vision. North for nature and not for humans, and I consider dogs as part of that. While the south side, that's where the human interaction with the environment is more ideally suited for recreational purposes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And the beach project is all incorporated into this?
It is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to suggest that dogs are an operational issue, that you probably have your hands full without trying to resolve the dog issue in the general plan, but that's just my perspective.
Shall we open this up for public comment? Thank you, Barry.
Okay, thank you.
Does any member of the public wish to speak on this topic? So, Jeff, do we need to do anything else?
We've captured your comments, and we'll work with them. Unless there's something more that you want to add or you want to formalize any of that in a motion, I've got good notes. I'm sure Barry does too, and it's also recorded, so we're okay to move forward with your input.
Brian? Since this is the last meeting of the Waterfront Committee, the process, this will be, to be clear, is going to be at the planning and zoning level, and for this part of our duties is transferred to planning and zoning and council. Is that correct?
Primarily, although the Parks and Recreation Commission will also have a role in reviewing the public park portion of the waterfront, certainly. And so we'll be doing a similar session like this probably with them sometime in the next few months. We haven't scheduled it yet, but the overall guidance and the preparation of the document on a month-to-month basis is the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then the City Council, of course, makes the final decisions and kind of the high-level policy decisions.
Just to add on to what Jeff just said, the Planning and Zoning Commission's study sessions usually happen at their second meeting of each month, so the fourth Wednesday at 7. We typically take an hour to deal with whatever topic happens to be on the table. We talked about the land use element at the last meeting. We're developing land use policies, so I would keep an eye out for the topics that are going before them. We post the agenda a week before, and at some point, it's likely that they'll have waterfront policies as their agenda topic, probably later this year. We are looking at finishing this project early 2015. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. So shall we move on to item 5-2, a report on preparation of grant application to California Coastal Conservancy for funds to prepare a transition plan for implementation of the East Shore State Park.
Yes, thanks to Claire's hard work, we have prepared and submitted to the Coastal Conservancy a grant request for $168,000. This would be money that would be used to hire a consultant to do the data collection and analysis and cost estimating and so forth that would to understand what needs to be done to make the transition of the publicly owned portions of the bulb from where it is today, the condition that it's in today, to what it would need to be in order to be implemented into the Shore State Park by the East Bay Regional Park District and by the state, accepted by the state as well. We anticipate being on the Coastal Conservancy agenda at their May 29th meeting in Sacramento, where they will hopefully be considering this. And we're optimistic that so far we've gotten good positive feedback from the Conservancy staff, so we're hopeful that we'll get that. There will be public input as part of that the preparation of the transition plan. And my guess is it will kind of gear up, assuming we get the award of the grant, we would gear up in midsummer, mid to late summer, and there would be public participation at various stages of the preparation of plan. We'll also be incorporating a CEQA review, the California Environmental Quality Act review, into the document, so that it really forms the basis of, call it an action plan or something like that. But it would inform the parties that need to negotiate agreements or prepare final plans for bidding out of construction work, or not construction work, but repair work or landscaping work or so forth. We made this application in collaboration with East Bay Regional Park District, so we want to bring them along the way so that they're comfortable with the conclusions as well. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
I do have a question. You know, it's very common practice in submitting grant proposals to look for support from others. Is this a situation where we feel that the grant is secured without that, or is that something that we have done or are contemplating doing? Looking for letters of support or people to speak at the Conservancy in support of the application.
That would be terrific. We do have letters of support from Assemblymember Skinner and the Park District. And Lonnie Hancock, thanks Claire, I forgot. As a part of our application, but if there are members of the public who want to make the trip to Sacramento or write to the Conservancy in advance of the meeting, that would be terrific. I think the more confidence that they have that there's a common vision, the more comfortable they will be spending the money. Thank you. Yeah, that would be great.
I have just an important comment here. I had, a while back, half hour ago, I received a text. Someone said, who's watching it on TV, says they can't hear anything on TV. FYI, who's ever doing this, and I just... Right? It says very poor. And that's from a faithful watcher of, who's well respected.
Okay, great. Cool. I'm usually, if you just talk normally into the microphone, that works well, but do talk into the microphone. Leaning back may be more comfortable, but it's harder for the sound system to pick it up. Maybe that will help us a little bit.
And is there any public comment on this item? Doesn't look like it. So shall we move to 5-3, a status report on the East Bay Regional Park District Albany Beach Project?
Yes, I can give you some information on this. Two things. First of all, the Park District is, at one point, was kind of weighing the feasibility of whether they would be able to start some component of the beach project this year. I think currently they're not planning to do that, with the exception of doing some improvements to the trail on the neck. Let me pull up Google Earth and show you. Ultimately, as part of the beach project, once it winds its way through the litigation process, there'll be some work done on the southern shore of the neck that's going to require heavy equipment. And in order to get the equipment out there and back safely, they want to be able to drive a truck down that middle road there, which right now in the area where the cursor is not passable by vehicles. It widens out further to the east and it's fine. So there may be some work later this year.
Jeff, could you speak up a little closer to the microphone,
Okay.
please?
Thank you. There may be some work later this year in 2014 to create, to widen and fill in the pits in the trail so that the trucks can navigate that segment of the trail. But other than that, the district's just moving forward the groundwork, working through the litigation, as I mentioned. That's before the Superior Court, and I believe it's the judge, it's now in the hands of the judge for a ruling. In addition, they need to do some permitting. Army Corps of Engineers is notoriously slow in permitting, so they're working on that and trying to be in a position that once the litigation is resolved, that they can move forward with the project very quickly. Be happy to answer any questions about that.
I guess we have no questions. Any public comment? I guess we have no.
Is there any legal update?
There was a CEQA challenge to the board's approval of the project. The plaintiffs and the defense attorneys have all pleaded, have all filed the necessary documents, and the hearings have been held. So it's before the judge. It's now the judge's decision to make, and that usually happens pretty quickly. I think the judge has 45 days or something, but usually it comes in a little bit more quickly than that.
I actually attended the hearing. It was interesting, and as you probably saw in the newspapers, the judge subjected the lawyer for the East Bay Regional Park District to some pretty strong questioning about the district's decision not to distinguish between on and off leash dogs for purposes of the environmental analysis. So it wouldn't surprise me if it took the full 45 days. It's a pretty complex issue, and it wouldn't surprise me if the district were asked to do some additional environmental analysis. But we shall see.
Okay. So I guess we'll move on to item 5-4, a status report on the East Bay Regional Park District Measure WW funds.
I can start the discussion, and I believe Committee Member Papali also had some comments about this. So just to refresh everyone's memory, Measure WW is a bond measure that was approved by the voters in 2008. There was a number of components to it. It serves the Regional Park District throughout their entire district. There was a component of the funds that was allocated to cities on a per capita basis for cities to use for parks and recreation facilities as cities see fit. The city of Albany's share of that was $771,000. That's been for the waterfront related portion of it, $50,000 was allocated for the cove improvements, which is what we will be is on hold, but we do intend to use those funds to make the improvements that the committee approved last year around the Cove area, the picnic tables, the garbage cans, and so forth. There also are larger chunks of funds that are under the control of the district that will be, presumably, to the degree that they're available, we hope that the district will consider putting those into the waterfront improvements. And part of the transition plan effort that I was talking about with the Coastal Conservancy is to help lay the groundwork for requesting those, as well as laying the groundwork for other sources of funds that we will be seeking in order to do ultimately implement improvements to the publicly owned areas of the waterfront. Happy to answer any questions, or Francesco, you requested this. I don't know if there was anything else.
Well, so my understanding, well, there was $27 million that's available, of the WW funds.
$27 million were for the East Shore State Park in,
Right.
in the various cities, yes.
To restore, to expand and restore this 8-mile-long urban shoreline park adjacent to Oakland, Berkeley, Emeryville, Albany, and Richmond. So we have a fairly significant section of the shoreline there. So that would be, do you know if WW funds are being used for the beach project?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember the mix of funding. I know that they're using a variety of funds, some other state bond measures I know will be applied. How much WW, I don't recall offhand.
If they're using WW, I suspect it would be for the acquisition piece, not for the restoration piece.
Why would you assume that?
Because, as I understand it, the priority for WW is the various, and the reason that number is so big is the land that needs to be acquired for various things like completing the Bay Trail. It's just a lot of funding that is needed to do that.
It's always harder to get grant money for acquisitions. If once you control the land, you have a plan, then outside agencies tend to be a little bit more flexible. They like to give money that will be spent more quickly, that will have more visible, tangible results for them.
And for example, with the Brickyard, Berkeley is starting very soon. The East Bay Regional Park District is starting in Berkeley the restoration of the Brickyard, and the money for that is coming from the state. That will be $5 million. So it's for the restoration portions, we may need to be active in looking for those kinds of funding sources.
Other questions or comments? Public comment? All righty. Item 5-5, a report on the status of the Cove Project.
In terms of staff, the report is that we do have year approvals for picnic tables and garbage cans and other fixtures, and the plan that was developed with former committee member Napawan. It is our intention to ultimately implement that as soon as we can. We've made the decision that we felt like it would be best to do that after the issues that we're presently wrestling with on the waterfront are resolved. We're worried about investing money into expensive new equipment than having them potentially exposed to some vandalism. So we just felt it'd be prudent to complete that as quickly as we can. We want to do that. We understand that really sets a different tone for visitors, and we do intend to do that, but we just wanted to be prudent about the expenditure of the monies. So I will, I know that will be an important first step as we demonstrate what the waterfront can be, and we do intend to implement it as you've approved last year. The comments about installation of a plaque, all that is certainly included in what we would ultimately implement. And we also will, once it's implemented, gear up for maintenance of the facility. We realize that too is very important. It's not, even though the committee may not be around, that is not a project that's going to get lost on us.
And so as this is our last meeting, so as each one of these items we discuss, I'm just wanted to know who is which committee? Would this be Parks and Rec? That would be the logical.
It would be the logical place to give them an update, but based on your work, I don't see anything more than just an informational update is required. The funds are appropriated, the public decision-making process has been completed, it's just a matter of timing.
And I did get some communication from the Albany Strollers and Rollers, and they will produce the plaques that were initially part of the recognition, acceptance of the grant, so that they can give the proper recognition to the donors of the grant, and then have the city install them once they've produced them. But they will cover the cost
Great.
of the plaque, and all you need to do is install it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Any public comments? Okay.
Oh, the maintenance? Just as a note, I was down there today. There is spray painting on the back of the message board, and on one of the benches at the Cove, and on the signage. So.
Okay, item 5-6, a discussion regarding the city council decision on May 3rd to sunset the committee effective May 2014. Who would like to start? No?
Yeah, I believe the correct decision was made. I'd first like to thank the staff for all the work they've done on behalf of the committee, but I think the committee has shown itself, at least during my tenure, to be utterly ineffective and has been sidelined by other organizations which do the real planning for the East Bay Parks. And in my humble opinion, I think that the work that has been done here does not merit having killed all these poor little electrons that had to die to light the room during the course of these committee meetings. So I am in favor of the committee being disbanded. I think the city council did the right decision.
I don't question the council's prerogative to do what it did. You know, what I'm troubled by is the stated rationale. As I recall, there was one committee member who articulated the idea that given the transition of a significant portion of Albany's waterfront to the operational control of the park system, it didn't make sense for Albany to operate a regional park. That idea made sense to me from a policy level. What confused me was the articulation that the committee was too contentious. And I'm confused because my recollection of any contention rests during a time period when we were discussing the issue of homelessness on the bulb, which has continued to energize the city in a very particular way, whether that discussion took place here or whether it took place before the council. So I, for one, do not understand what too contentious means. If we're willing to publicly debate values, both personal and political, and people are willing to come to meetings and voice their concerns, I am hoping that every city body encourages that rather than discourages people from voicing what they believe. So that, and if I'm missing something, I hope, the rest of you will enlighten me. But I don't understand what too contentious means, and I don't understand how the council articulating a body as too contentious serves all of the citizens of Albany and encourages all of the citizens of Albany, regardless of political ideology, to participate.
One of the things that we initiated 2 years ago was the joint task force between the Waterfront Committee and the Social and Economic Justice Committee regarding homelessness at the bulb and the encampments. Up to that point, around 2 years ago, for the preceding 6 or more years, the issue had been ignored. Ignored to the point where it grew in size, that a headline in the Albany Journal is 4-story mansion at the bulb is dismantled by the city. We were the first group to face that issue, and I am proud that we did it, and I am proud of the fact that from that initial subcommittee grew the homeless task force, and after the homeless task force was disbanded, a very ardent and passionate and caring group has continued that effort to include into the work with the housing element certain things that had been missing for the last decade. And I think that is a major accomplishment that we can take credit for, because at least 4 of us on this committee had been involved for most of the last year or so on that issue, either in this meeting or on patch or on the task force or at city council meetings. Secondly, we had approved the first major recreational improvement to the waterfront in almost 10 years, or maybe longer, that could and should have been, or could have been implemented easily as of this date. The irony is that it's not implemented, as Jeff has just recently stated, because it was decided to put it off because of the very contentious or difficult effort that the city is now engaging in attempting to address with their full effort the issue of homelessness in the city. I believe if that had been installed at the beginning of last year, when it was kind of scheduled to have done that, the attitude about what we'd have done and what we could be doing and how we cared about our waterfront and would be very different. But that is not the case at this moment, and I can deal with those 2 issues, and I'm actually quite proud to have worked so hard and continually work to helping deal with the issue of the Albany citizens who don't have a place to live. The question is any of this being heard? That irony of that is not lost on me. So if anyone... Void.
My turn? Just briefly, I think we all need to keep in mind that the reason for these experts in to talk to us and so forth is so that we can be helpful to the city council, so that our function is one that helps them do their... We have not been... Consider how that eventuated, and of the Waterfront Committee has not been... They decided to review its status, and I think we need to accept that, but I look forward to continue.
I think that's a great observation. I take no issue with that observation. I'm talking about the rationale as I heard it. On the other hand, the citizens' government will get as many opportunities to discuss and debate things as possible, and that caught in the middle. I think we recognize staff was being worked very, very hard, and via system works, you know.
People had the opportunity to comment. It's not
decided. There were 15 to 1 in terms of emails that were sent. It was an open session, and I did real discussion, which I think anyone who watched it knows that was proposed. And I thought in open discussion that it would have been brought up at our last meeting, that they were going to vote on it. And that just didn't, that felt, and it would have felt very, very different if, and then before it went to the committee, to this council. But that option wasn't given for, I think, 30 or 40 years. That's all.
Well, and I also want to articulate that, you know, I agree with we were being asked to develop a work plan. And at the same time, that work plan was being discussed within the context of putting that into context. Supposed to encourage sincere.
That it can limit collaboration. It can limit dialogue. There's a more, that this wasn't a community dialogue process between this committee and the council, perhaps. I'm not sure. I hear this given the opportunity to end. And I think that we're better off they would see it. Manipulation, or I don't see any evidence of that at all. And I think that we're better off looking for answers by trying to put ourselves in the shoe to work hard on waterfront issues. Advisory committees, there's more than enough to be done that everybody wants to see happen at the waterfront.
Or do so. I don't feel like that effort is in any way made as far as our articulating frustration. I feel like how we move from A to B.
May I move adjournment? Yeah.
My condolences to those of you on the committee who have devoted a lot of time and energy to this committee over the last couple of years. As you probably know, the Berkeley Waterfront was consolidated with Parks and Rec Commission some months ago. I had served a total of 14 years on the commission, 6 of those years as chair, suddenly being a civilian again. I think ostensibly the reason for consolidating the Berkeley Waterfront Commission with Parks and Rec was cost saving, and it was probably just as far off the mark as the reason given in this case. The Berkeley Waterfront Commission was one of the most inexpensive commissions to run, and the result seems to waste a lot of staff time. It means that the staff that deal with parks have to sit through waterfront issues, the staff that deal with trees. What I think is that waterfront commissioners, and to some require some technical expertise from the opinions of, instead of the political divisions on the city council, usually came to pretty strong consensus on most of the lightning, and it tended to be with the commission on one side and the council on the other side, instead of reflecting the uptown divisions. So the simple, as Rochelle said, we were not serving, what we saw as the petty divisions down to the waterfront. We were solving problems. I don't know if there's a long-term solution to this. It would be nice if council members could educate once. They might come to consensus more easily also if that could be done. Oakland has a nice solution. They have a port functions extremely well. Maybe a year from now, that will be an idea that you.
I guess there's no other comment. Okay,
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.